Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we must set this Bava Batra daf Hey. We are going to begin on the very top of Hey Amud Aleph. So we were learning in yesterday's daf and yesterday's Mishnah that if you have someone who has an inner field and then an individual who owns fields all around the inner field, and he starts building fences 1, 2, and 3, so at that point, we say that the inner field owner doesn't have a chiyuv to have to contribute. However, if the fourth wall is built, then, as the Gemara said, it's different. So on this, the Gemara continues with relaying the following story. Runya, who is a person who we'll see a little bit more about him in the second story. Now, he actually had he was owner of the inner field. And Akvi Ravina me'arber ruchaisav. Ravina ended up putting a fence all the way around his properties. So Ravina owned properties on all four sides and built walls. So in essence, this was something which was very beneficial. As we saw in yesterday's daf and Rashi, that even though maybe it's not typical that you be chayiv, but that's only in order to be able to build a large 4 amos fence, because of hezek re'iyah maybe isn't something which we're concerned of. However, we do need a 10 tefach fence in order that animals shouldn't just be coming back and forth or escaping. So because of this, Ravina felt that Runya should contribute to the fence that was built. Armali havli kama de gadri. So please pay for the fence. So didn't give me anything. So it's havli if he caught him bezoil. If you don't want to pay for the actual nice fence that I built, at least pay me for a lesser quality fence. Give me some money. Nothing. Havli agar netirusa. As we said, perhaps there's an opinion that it's not even necessary to pay for any of the materials, but the reality is if you would have a breach in your fence, you would need to have a guard to watch that area, so you are saving money, so at least give me for that. Again, didn't give it to him. So so he was engaged in fencing a decal tree. Laris, and he said to his sharecropper, Zil shakal mine kibura diahani. So go, says Rashi, to take an eshkol shel tamarim, a cluster of dates, mishel runya, from runya, ubafanav, and he was doing it in front of him. Ozul asui, he was going, Rama Beikala, there was a loud noise, Garba runya, biarisi ravina, that he was shouting, galis daitach demenach nichalach. Obviously, this is what Ravina said, it's clear that it's very good that you have this fence. That's a form of protection. It should at least be like, says Rashi, even if you're not afraid of thieves, there's goats that can come and eat from your crop. At least you need to have a guard for that. When it comes to these goats coming, that's not something which I'm as concerned of. It says Rashi, lahazik v'ligo behen v'yorim v'chein kol loshen hachraza. Okay, so that's not something which I was concerned of. So Amalei v'loi gavra boyis lamechela. Isn't that something which I want to eat from? Also coming to Rabbi, Amalei zil paise b'mai if diafayas. Go and appease him with what you can appease him. Says Rashi, Tovacha l'sfayis ba'agar netira, hoyol v'nitzrocha kach. You, Runya, do have an obligation to at least pay for the guard that you would have had to pay. So therefore, that's something which you have a responsibility to have to do. And then he said further, Ilo dinalach dina ki Rav Huna libd Rav Yosi. If not, then I'm going to end up paskening like the more stringent shita, which is going to make you have to pay, as we saw in yesterday's daf, a lot more than just the amount of a security guard. Okay, So therefore, at the end of the day, Runya was chayiv to have to pay for something. Then the Gemara says another case of Runya Zavan Ara a Mitzvah to Ravina. And this could very well be the same property over here. Runya purchased land on the border of Ravina. Now, Sab Ravina Salukim Mishum Did Bar Metzra. Now, because Runya stepped in, now let's assume that this is the inner field that we're talking about. It's possible it could be another field, but let's say it is. So you can imagine Ravina would have much better benefited from having purchased this property. So once it was for sale, there's a din of bar metzra that the neighbor has first rights to be able to make this purchase, because it makes a lot of sense. If I own a certain amount of square footage, for me to be able to buy my neighbor's adjacent land for fair market price, it's something which is a lot better for me than to own land in numerous different locations which are not right next to each other. So he felt that Runya was wrong for purchasing it from underneath him. So Sabra Ravina Skuli Mishum did a bar metzah. So Malay Rav Safra, buried Rav Yevel Ravina, he said to Ravina, no. Amri Inshi, people say Arbel at Salwa, Arbel at Salola. 4 to the poor, 4 to the rich. What does that mean? Says Rashi. Ani Shemati Salwa Ratzan Ani at Salola Ratzan Usher. So again, what is rich or poor? What does that mean? 4 to the poor, 4 to the rich. Says Rashi, Mizeh Anihu. We cannot forget that Runya was actually not wealthy. He was a poor person. But Sarachlo Hasadala Farnasa. The purpose why he has this field is for his own parnasa, to survive. What is the reason for the din of bar metzra? Because of Yosisi Hashavat Toiv. It's the right thing to do. Why do you need this land? You don't need to buy this land. You can buy land anywhere. But for me, because I own land right next to it, it's very beneficial for me to own this land, a second piece of property, which is right next to it. Because of Yosisi Hashavat Tov. You also need to apply Yosisi Hashavat Tov to yourself. So you can't just apply the dinim when it's convenient for you, because the whole purpose of Asisa Yashavat Toiv is also to be good to poor people, and Runya was poor. Okay, so therefore there's no din of bar mitzvah in that case. Says the next Mishnah. Says the Mastis. Kaisel Chatzir Shenafal. Let's say you have the wall of a courtyard that fell. Mechayav Noiso Liv Noiso. So there's a chiyuv to build it, as we saw. It's brought down actually in Moed Katan, that when it comes to a chatzir, kaisel chatzir, so even on Chol HaMoed we have leniencies, and especially if it's a makam sakana, as the Gemara Moed Katan says. So ad arba amos. So the wall, because it is supposed to be 4 amos high, which is 6 feet, so the average man who's 5'9" won't be able to see into the other area. So that's how high it should be. And we should assume that both parties of this chutzner, this partnership, they both contributed. They both paid their even share, unless you can prove that you paid everything and that other guy didn't pay anything. Let's look at Rashi. Again, as long as it's 4 amos high, that's tall enough. If one person says after the wall was built, I paid my fair share, this other guy didn't want to contribute, and therefore this guy has to pay the other half. I paid. The other person says, no, I already paid my half. So the person who said I also paid half is believed until you can prove otherwise. So it says Rashi, you have to have eidim that he didn't give. Because since it's an obligation to build this wall, to have it fixed, if you knew that your partner was unwilling to contribute, you wouldn't have built that wall. You would have gone to Beis Din and complained that this guy didn't contribute. He's not going to contribute, and you're not going to build the wall at all until Beis Din orders that he pays for half of it. So the fact that the wall is standing, it's assumed that probably what happened was both of you did pay for it, unless you can prove otherwise. But that's only if the wall is 4 amos, because it doesn't have to be any higher than that. It says the Mishnah, Medal amos lo ma'alim. If it's higher, ein mechayavin oisai. So the second owner is chayav to pay up to the 4 amos, but anything above that is not something which he's required to. Okay, he's not obligated to do so. However, let's say the second guy who refused to build a 20-foot wall, he decides to build a second 20-foot wall of his own near this, even though he didn't put beams to connect to this other one, he has to pay the whole thing. There, it's the opposite. Because typically, since it's above 4 amos, a person does not have to contribute that high. So we're going to assume that it was not done, unless he's able to prove otherwise. Says Rashi, the goli daite de nichle bahagba dehayich. He's actually happy that it's a very high wall. So this way, his new wall that he also built very high will be able to connect with beams. So therefore, it shows that he really wanted it above 4 amos, and therefore now he has to pay for more. But if he didn't do that, then he doesn't have to pay for anything above the 4 amos. Okay, let's see the Gemara. Omer Reish Lakish. So according to Reish Lakish, he holds hakoyvezman l'chaverai. Let's say you say to your friend, okay, you have until September 1st to pay me the $100. Yomula praticha. And then in August, a month before, he said, oh, I already paid b'toich zmani. Enu neman. When you give a person a certain amount of time to make the payment back, September 1st, we're going to be hopeful that he'll pay back on time on September 1st. We're not going to assume that the person's going to end up paying before the time that the loan is due. Zimne. It's possible that he paid before. Zimdin de misramale zuzi. Oimer Ezel Ifre. Why not? Let's say the guy borrowed money for a few months, and then he has the ability to pay him back in August, so maybe he would actually have done so. So this is a machlokus, whether or not when it comes to a loan, do we say that when a person says, oh yeah, I paid up before my time, that's possible. So kehechidoi litradon. Again, he made pay up early because he just doesn't want to be bothered with this. He just wants it off of his head as we continue Hamid base. Tanan. So perhaps we can answer this question based on our Mishnah. The Mishnah says, B'cheska shenasan shiyavi raya shelo nasan. When you have this wall that is built, you have this wall of the chutzner that fell down. So in this situation, you have to rebuild it. So up until 4 amos, we assume that the second person actually did build it, and he did contribute. Now, why do we assume he had to contribute? Says the Gemara. Pay me back on time. We certainly should assume he paid back on time. I paid back within the time. So perhaps this is a raya that a person would pay back before their time, right? And there, because we're assuming that this person who had the obligation to build this wall, so he could say, you know what, you pay me. You have to pay me when the wall is completely finished. Maybe that's the assumption, and therefore the guy said, no, I'll pay you back. I'll pay you even earlier. So we see that we could assume that person would have done so. So shani hacha the whole safa b'safa zimnihu. It doesn't work that the chiyuv of contributing is only at the end. Every single row of bricks, every step of the process, they had to contribute to all the raw materials and everything. So this is not a case of it happening before the time that it's due. It's due now, and therefore, since it's due now, we assume that it was paid. Okay. And now the Gemara asks the other way. Tashma b'cheskas shelo nasa not shevirai shenasa. So the Sefer of the Mishnah said that if, let's say, the wall was built above 4 amos, and the second owner really doesn't wish to have it that high. So the din is that if the second guy would build another wall that very high, so he's saying Megagom Sakol, we require him to pay for this much higher wall to contribute to it. And we're going to assume that he didn't pay. So now perhaps we have an answer to our question. I paid back on time. Am I low? Why would he not be believed? I thought we said that when a person pays a person, we assume is going to pay back his loan on time. What do we say? Low of it. We see a person does not pay back early because this guy, if he paid back early, that's what he's just saying. We're saying we don't believe him. So no. This person is dealing with a case where the wall is above 4 amos. So he built his own wall, which is also very tall, adjacent to this other tall wall, but he doesn't know all the dinim. So as far as he's concerned, that maybe he's not mechuyev to have to pay for more than the 4 amos of this kaisel. And therefore he wouldn't have paid in that situation because he doesn't know necessarily that the din is that he would be mechuyev to have to pay. So therefore, in this case of our Mishnah, only do we assume that he didn't pay because he's going to wait until he's instructed to pay by Beis Din. Okay. Rav Papa v'Rav Huna b'Redu Rav Yeshua Abdi Kabaye v'Rava Ma'Ravashi Avi Kareish Lakish the Hilchas of Kareish Lakish. So even though we have varied opinions, we say the halacha is like Kareish Lakish. That again, hoikavez man lechavera v'omer praticha, and I paid you within or before my time. We don't believe you, eno neman, and we're just going to assume that you didn't pay. And on this, the chiddush, which all the questions are going to lie on, is the following line: V'afil miyasmi. Even when it comes to a yosel, what is that? It says Rashi, so let's say you have a loiva, and again he's supposed to pay on September 1st, and then he died in August. He died a month before. So says Rashi, so now the malva can go to his children and collect the debt below shvua, and this man does not have to make any shvua that he didn't collect any money. We're not going to assume that he paid, because since it was before August 1st, before the due date, the assumption is your father who had died did not pay, and therefore I can collect from you. Says the Gemara, typically when you collect from your Yisayimim, you need a shvua. We have the assumption that a person did not pay in advance earlier, and since they didn't pay in advance earlier, so therefore you can collect from them. Okay, we're going to stop there. Let's see all the questions. Basically, all three questions are the same. Starting off with question 12. Where do we find this? So, if the loiva, the borrower, died before the loan was due, we don't assume that he paid back earlier. The chazaka ended up we have the chazaka that a person would not do that, which is the same as question TB20. I wrote im hatainu hitne shehu pareya b'tayich zmanai. If they claim that he paid before his time, b'mnei sheish chazaka she'ein nifroyim b'tayich or b'fnei zmanai. So this is referring to again the father. Now let's look at question TA19. Habole par mnixi yisam par el b'shvua. Matai insar shvul chadman da'omer umadua. TA19. B'tayich zmano. Hainu shemesa al b'tayich zman. Chazaka in adam pareya b'tayich zmano. Yad kan.